Hello my lovelies, I thought today I would do you a video on how to knit. I know there's a few of you out there that would love to knit a poly cardigan or an ollie cardigan, but I've never tackled the art of knitting. So this is just a video just to show you how to do some simple knitting stitches. So you've got your knit stitch and your purl stitch. So I'll be talking you through those. Hopefully in order for you to be able to understand how to construct and knit a poly cardigan. Okay, so these yarns I've got here in front of me, these are my go-to yarns. Absolutely love working with bamboo. It's just my real favourite yarn at the moment. So I've got here a king cole bamboo cotton, absolutely beautiful. When this is knitted up, it's just really floaty and airy and soft. Absolutely love it. This one is the Style Craft Naturals Bamboo and Cotton. Again, a lovely one to use for poly cardigans. And this is the Serdar Snuggly Baby Bamboo. So they're all bamboo based. And like I say, it's just a yarn that I just tend to go to all the time because I love working with these. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to cast on your knitting work. So the needles that I'm using today, these are size 3 3/4. I tend to use this size mainly, and these are pony needles. Now I love these needles because they're really quiet to work with. So what you don't want is a needle that really clickety clack really loudly, especially if you're working at night. You know, hubby's trying to watch telly and you're sat there click clack clacking. That'll really get on his nerve. So yeah, I love these pony needles because they are really quiet when you work with them, and they just sort of slide through. The stitches just slide and glide off without too much of a click clack. So yeah, great. Another thing that is worth investing in is a row counter. Now we have got these on the website, but they are out of stock at the moment, and they come in 2 sizes, a bigger one to fit on your fatter needles and then a smaller one to fit on your thinner needles. Most important to have a row counter, that way you can just keep track of what row you're on when you're working through your pattern. You tend to work it in multiples of 2, so you do 2 rows and then move it on a couple of rows. So yeah, most important thing to have is a row counter. Okay, so without further ado, let's show you how to cast on. So you take your yarn, and you need to start off with a slip knot. Okay, so that's basically just wrapping it around into a loop, bringing the yarn through that hole and pulling through. So there is your slip knot. Now always make sure that you've got a nice long tail end. It depends on how much work you need to actually sew together. You might need an 8-inch tail on the end of it, or you might only need a short one. As long as you've got enough to put your needle in, you know, your sewing needle, just to sort of stitch it through the work so that it's not going to go anywhere. So yeah, don't start off with a little tiny short tail end. That's ridiculous. You need a longish tail end. Okay, so got your slip knot, take your needle and position it on. Now when you're knitting, you need to think about the tension of the thread coming through the stitches. Now there's lots of different ways to hold the yarn. Now my favourite way of doing it is I put it over my ring finger. Okay, so it's sliding through my ring finger as I work. You see some people do it in all different ways. Some people wrap it twice around their little finger, or they'll hook it through their pointy finger. Okay, but my favourite method is just looping it, hooking it over my ring finger, and it will just slide through there. It tends to go below my ring so it doesn't get catching on them. So yeah, you'll find a way to actually hold the yarn. That might seem a bit alien to start with, but believe me, you know, once you practice, you will find the way that is most comfortable for you to hold your yarn. With your left hand needle, you hold your hand on top of it, so it's grabbing it from the top, and you're always sort of holding on to the tail end or the work with your finger and thumb on this side, and then this needle you sort of hold and balance like this. You don't hold that like that as well, that's be very difficult to knit like that. So this one goes like this. You wrap the yarn over your finger, and that is how you position your hands to knit. Okay, so for our first, I'm going to show you how to do two different cast on methods. The first one I'm going to show you is just the UK standard cast on method, which I don't use, by the way. I use another cast on method, but I'll show you this way first. So I'm pulling slightly on my working yarn, and I will push my right hand needle through the loop of that slip knot. Then I will take the working yarn and I use this finger for hooking over. Okay, that's all I do with this finger, is this is the finger that hooks over. So I'm going to hook it over and above the right hand needle, which is underneath the left hand needle. So left hand needle, right hand needle goes through the loop and it's underneath the left hand needle, and I bring it around and over the top, and then I just pull the loop through, and then I put that loop that I've just made and worked, put that onto my left hand needle. So I've now got 2 stitches on there. Now without taking that needle out, without taking that right hand needle out, I'm going to slide it back down under the left hand needle, so it's now ready in a position for me to wrap the yarn round again, pull it through, there's that next stitch, and I'm now going to hook that onto my left hand needle. So keeping the right hand needle in the stitch, but bringing the needle underneath the left hand needle. So left hand needle is on top, right hand needle is underneath. Wrap the yarn around and over the top, bring it through. There it is, you can bring it out quite big, quite long. Wrap it round, pop it on your left hand needle, put that right hand needle under the left hand needle, and you're ready to make another stitch. Now all the time this is happening, you don't need to think about it, but your tension will be working. It's something that you don't think about doing as you go, but once you've learned how to do it, it just becomes second nature. So what I'm doing is this is quite tight here, it's not loose or baggy. I'm cupping it through my fingers at the bottom here. It's sliding through my ring finger, and I'm working it with my pointy finger. So you're just sliding it on, and then each time I get to that stage where I've slid that stitch on, I just give it a pull just to make sure that stitch is nice on that needle there, because that's what gives you your consistency of stitches, and you know, making sure they all look nice and even. So wrap around, bring through, put that stitch onto that needle, pull, wrap around, bring through, put that stitch on that needle, bring that needle underneath, pull, wrap around, bring the stitch through, pop it on the left needle, put the right needle under the left needle and pull, wrap around, slip, pull. Okay, so that is how you are doing your UK cast on method. Okay, so I've done my cast on stitches and I've just worked a few rows in knit just so that you can see the cast on stitches that have been produced. So now I'm just going to show you another way to do casting on your stitches. So I have produced my slip knot as before, pop that on to my left hand needle. Now this method is called cable cast on. I think it might also be called continental cast on, but yeah, I know it as the cable cast on, and this is the method that I use every time I knit. I don't use this method. I'll show you why in a minute when I compare the two. I always use this cable cast on method. So as before, needle yarn is wrapped around my ring finger, and right needle goes through the loop, yarn underneath, bringing up and over, and pull that stitch through. Same as before, hooking the stitch onto the left needle, but this time you're going to take the needle out and you're going to work in between the two stitches that you've just produced. So you're working in between the last stitch you produced and the one before. So you put your needle right the way through that hole. So that goes through there. Pull on the yarn, wrap around, bring it through, hook it onto your needle. This time it goes through the gap between the two stitches, not through the loop of the stitch, but through the gap in between the two stitches. Wrap around, make another stitch, hook it on, go in between the two stitches, wrap around, hook on, in between the two stitches. Now each time I'm making a stitch, as I hook it on, you can make it make that as long as you like. You just hook it over, and then I pull back that area there, and then I hook my needle, put my needle through there, and then I pull. And by pulling each time, prior to making a new stitch, you are just making that tension nice and tight there. And you only need to do this sort of pulling bit on the cast on method. So through, pull, wrap around, hook on, through the middle, pull, wrap around, hook on, through the middle, pull. And then that's just keeping those stitches nice and tight and nice and consistent. You need to have that little pull just so that everything is going to lay nice and flat along the bottom lower edge. So that little pull, that little tug you do in between each stitch is really important, just to get a nice smooth line along the bottom edge of your work. Okay, so I'm going to carry on and just knit a few rows, and then I'll show you the difference between the two cast on methods. Okay, so I've done another little sample piece, and this time it's with the cable cast on method. Now, I don't know whether you can see clearly enough, but if I put the two together, you'll see that the UK cast on method, you are left with little holes in the work, and it's quite a loose weave, and it can be a bit inconsistent and a little bit baggy looking. So that is the reason why I don't like the normal standard traditional cast on method. I much prefer this cable cast on. What you're left with is little slanting stitches which are all tight. There's no gaps, there's no holes, and it just gives a really nice edge to the bottom of your knitting. Nice, consistent, tight little edge. So yeah, so that is the cast on method that I favour when I do all my work. Okay, so onwards, let's teach you how to do a knit stitch, because there's two stitches that you need to learn. One is the knit stitch and the second one is the purl stitch. So for the knit stitch, wrapping our yarn around our ring finger, or however you're going to find to hold it is comfortable for you. My hand is on top of my needle, on my left needle, and it's balanced like this on my right needle. So it's just balanced there. Okay, so you put your right needle into your hook on your left needle, your loop I should say, on your left needle, and you wrap the yarn from below to above, just like you did when you cast on. And this time when you pull it through, you slide off that stitch, so you're left with a brand new stitch on your left hand needle. So your right needle through the loop on the left needle, from below bring it up, hold on, pull it through and slide it off. So needle through the loop, from below bring it up, pull it through and slide it off. So you're creating new stitches on your right hand needle. Now there's a number of things that is happening as you're working which you won't be noticing. It's a bit like driving a car. You know when you drive a car and you go somewhere and you think, and you end up at your destination, you think, oh, blimey, how did I get here? I don't even remember going over that roundabout. I can't remember going through that village. You just drive and you get there, and you don't give any thought to indications, clutch work, brake work. It just happens. And this is what's going to happen with your knitting. You're not going to be thinking about what you're doing. You're just going to be knitting away quite merrily, and the work will be increasing, but you won't need to actually physically think about what you're doing, just like you do when you drive a car. Okay, so the things that are happening that you're not thinking about will be when you put your needle in and you pull your stitch through, you're going to be hooking around with your pointy finger. So this is where the tension is as well. So that is hooking around, and you're holding it, you're pulling it quite tight here, you're sort of giving it a bit of a tug, and then as it slips through, this finger is then gliding the needle back and over. As you put your needle into each stitch, your thumb is gently pulling that work down so that you can open that stitch up and poke through. So that's all things that are happening that you're not thinking about. And the other thing is you're sometimes pressing down on that to bring the stitches further up the needle. So there's lots of things happening as you knit that you don't think about. It just happens as second nature. So through, around, pull through, slide off. Through, around, pull through, slide off. Through, around, pull through, slide off. Pull around, through, around, pull through, slide off. Okay, so I'll just show you again on one more row. So through, around, pull through, slide off. Through, around, pull through, slide off. And all the time there's lots of little things that your fingers are doing that you're not even really thinking about what's happening. You're just knitting. That yarn is sliding through over your ring finger. It's being controlled by your pointy finger. The tension is happening in there. The more you do, the quicker you'll become. I think the main work is in your pointy finger here, because this is the one that's pushing the yarn around. It's the yarn that's holding a lot of the tension as you work. So yeah, that is the finger that does the most. So that is a series of knit stitches. And when you do a series of knit stitches all together, when you knit each row, when you knit the front row and you knit the back row, that is a series of knit stitches. That's called a garter stitch. Okay, so if anything asks for a garter stitch, that is what that is. It's knit both sides. You generally find this along the bottom edge of a cardigan, or you're doing the Polly Dolly Doodah cardigan case. Yeah, so this is what you will find along the bottom edge of the Polly cardigan. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to do a purl stitch. So that was a knit stitch, and this is a purl stitch. So this time, yarn over, ring finger. Where we've been doing the knit stitching, you've been going in from above, from the front of the work. So this is the front of the work, this is the back of the work, this is the front of the needle, this is the back of the needle. So where we've been doing the knit stitch, we've been going in from the front to the back and wrapping round. That's how we've been doing our knit, from the front through the loop to the back, wrapping around. And our yarn is facing backwards. Our yarn is behind the work. As we do our knit stitch, our yarn is always behind the work. When you do a purl stitch, you bring your yarn forward. So forward is in front of you, facing you. So you bring your yarn forward. You're still keeping your yarn wrapped around your fingers, and you're still using that working finger as usual. The only difference is that the yarn is now in front, and you are going in the front of the loop. So before, when we did a knit stitch, we were going in towards the back. This time we're going in, keeping it at the front. And then we're hooking around as we've done before. So hooking in the front, wrapping around, hooking in the front. So the right needle is laying on top, front ways, of the left needle. Bringing it in at the front, hooking it around, bringing it in at the front. So just go back and show you the knit stitch again. So knit stitch is the yarn is behind, so the back of the work, and the right needle is going in through the loop, and it's still at the back behind, and it's working in. So at the back behind. With purl, your yarn is forward in the front facing you, and your right needle is going on top of your left needle in front. You're still hooking round the same way, but everything is now working in front of you, and that is a purl stitch. Okay, so on this row I'm going to show you 2 knit stitches and 2 purl stitches. Now that is the sort of stitches that you would do for a ribbed effect. So if anything needed a rib, then you would do 2 purl, 2 knit, or 3 purl, 3 knit. Okay, so we'll start with our 2 knit. So 1, 2. Yarn is at the back. Bring the yarn forward. So it's now facing me and it's in the front. And we'll do 2 purl. Take the yarn back behind. Knit 2 stitches for knit. Bring the yarn forward to the front. Do 2 stitches for a purl. Take the yarn back behind for 2 knit stitches. Bring the yarn forward to do purl, and the needle is on top of it. So needle on top, needle underneath. Okay, now so like I said, that is a garter stitch. That's all knit. So it's knit both sides. That is a garter stitch. To do like the main body of a cardigan, you will be doing a stocking stitch. Now to do a stocking stitch, your right side row is always knit. And then when you turn over, all your stitches on your wrong side row are purl. Now you'll notice that my row counter is on my left needle at the moment on my purl row. So that row there, that complete row there was purl. Turn it over. There's my row counter. I'm going to start a knit row. I've got my row counter on my right needle. It's going to be my right hand needle. And it's usually worked in twos, so now I would say I've just done two, so it was on two, I've just done 2 rows. I'm going to put it up 2, 4. Okay, so if you have your row counter, let's get that to the right number. If you have your row counter on your right needle as you're starting your knit row, then you'll always remember where you are within your knitting. So let's just do that again. So we're going to do this row as a knit row. So all those things are happening to your fingers that you're not thinking about, the pulling, the pushing, stretching down of the stitch. You're not thinking about any of those little actions that's happening. It's just automatic. Now the best way to learn knitting is just to do sample squares like this. Cast on 20 stitches and just work a series of knit rows and a series of purl rows and then a series of knit 1 row, purl 1 row. Okay, so you can see that the shape, the knitting has taken on a completely new shape, a new design. That is garter stitch here, which was knit every row. This little bit here that I've just done here, this is stocking stitch. This is knit 1 row, purl 1 row, and this is what you find in the main body of most garments, stocking stitch. So garter stitch, stocking stitch. Garter stitch is knit every row, stocking stitch, knit 1 row, purl 1 row. Okay, so I've just done a few more rows just to give it a little bit more depth, and the next thing I'm going to show you how to do is how to increase your stitch count. So for my increased stitches, I always do an M1, which is a make 1. Now an M1 increased stitch is completely different from an increased stitch. So if my pattern calls for an M1, you need to make sure that you do M1 and not increase, because you'll end up with a wrong stitch count. You'll end up with too many stitches. Okay, so to do an M1, which is an increase, I'm going to just knit 2, and then to increase, with my left needle, I'm lifting up and taking the little bar of yarn that is running in between the 2 stitches. So I've got this little bar here, I'm hooking it up. I'm going to hook it up and I'm going to pop it onto my left hand needle. and that is now ready for me to work into. So I'm just going to knit into that at the back as I would do a normal knit stitch, slip it off. So I started with 2 stitches, I've now got 3 because I've increased that 1 stitch in the bar that was running parallel between the 2 stitches. So I'll knit 2 and I'll increase another one, so I find the bar that's running in between the 2 stitches, pick it up with my right hand needle, pop it on my left hand needle, so it's now there ready for me to knit. Put my right hand needle through the back of it, so now you can see it's crossing at the back there, and I'm going to stitch into there. So I've now increased again by 1. So I'll knit 2, pull up the bar, pop it on my left hand needle, knit behind it from the back of it, slip off, knit 2, pick up the bar, pop it on my left hand needle and knit into the back of it. Now the beauty about this make one rather than an increase stitch, if you were to do an increase stitch you do end up with a little tiny hole in your work where that increase has been formed, but when you do a make one, if you do get a hole it's absolutely minuscule, it's a really tiny little hole, so it's one of the most invisible increase stitches that there is. So yeah, I always prefer to do a make one rather than an increase stitch. So I'm just working back now on my wrong side row, which is a purl row, and as you can remember this is a stocking stitch that I'm doing. So knit in one row, purl in one row is producing a stocking stitch. Okay, so let's turn the work over and have a look. We might not be able to see it just yet because it's only just been formed. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to decrease. So that's how you make stitches, and I'm going to show you how to decrease stitches. Okay, so there's 2 different ways to do it. When you decrease, the stitch that you're decreasing will slant one way, so it will slant to the right or it will slant to the left, right or left. Okay, so you can do knit 2 together or you can do slip slip knit. Okay, so we'll do slip slip knit to start with, and this is a decrease. So I'm going to knit 4, and then to decrease I'm going to slip 1 stitch onto my right hand needle, slip a 2nd stitch onto my right hand needle, and then with my left hand needle going in from the front I'm going to put my needle through both those 2 stitches, and then I'm going to wrap the yarn around the right hand needle and pull it out through. So I've decreased by 1 stitch there, and as you, I don't know if you can see, but that stitch there is actually slanting that way. That stitch there is giving it a slant that way. She says that's all I need, it was all stitches fall off her needle. Okay, so let's do that again. So let's just knit 3 this time, and then I'm going to slip slip. So I've slipped 2 onto my right hand needle, and then with my left hand needle in the front I'm going to pop that through those 2 stitches, and then I'm going to wrap my yarn around as if I was going to do a knit, pull that yarn through, and as you can see the uppermost stitch there is slanting that way. And then if you want the stitches slanting this way, we're going to do knit 2 together. So let's just knit 2 stitches. So I knit 2 together. So I'm taking 2 stitches at once, knitting those 2 together. And then this time that stitch there is slanting this way. Okay, so depending on what you want, whether you want your decreased stitches, because you will see the decreased stitch, whether you want that stitch, the uppermost stitch, to be looking like it's slanting that way, then you do slip slip knit. If you don't mind and you want the stitch slanting that way, you do knit 2 together. So on my sparkle slippers pattern, as you're decreasing that centre section, you're doing 5 times slip slip knit this side, because you want all your stitches slanting that way, and then this side of the little slipper you're doing 5 times knit 2 together, because you want all the stitches slanting that way. There is a mistake in that pattern. It says knit 18 and then start your slip slip knit. It's not, it's knit 20 then start your slip slip knit, knit 1 slip slip knit 5, knit 2 together 5 times, knit 20. So just check out that pattern, and where it says knit 18, change it to knit 20 either end of that row. Okay, so let's just do one more knit 2 together. So let's knit 2 stitches, and then to knit 2 together you're taking both stitches at once, you're knitting them together as if they were one. Oh, for goodness sake, get your needle through there. So put my needle through both those stitches together, knit it around, and then those stitches are slanting off this way. Okay, so that's how you decrease. So I don't know whether you can see, but you can see that the slip slip knit stitches are just slightly proud, and they're slightly, you can see that they are heading off in that direction, and the knit 2 together stitches again slightly proud and they're heading off in that direction. Okay, so that's how you do a decrease. Okay, so your work will call for buttonholes. So I'm now going to show you how to do a standard buttonhole. So let's knit 4, 3 even, and we'll make a buttonhole here. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring our yarn over the needle, just like we were going to purl actually. So from the back we're going to bring it over the front, and we're just going to leave it there like that. Then we're going to knit 2 together, a bit like we did the decrease just a minute ago. So I've yarned over, that's this bit here, and I've knit these 2 together. So let's knit another 2, and let's do another yarn over. So I'm bringing the yarn from the back to the front, then I'm going to knit 2 together. So what I've basically done is I've made a stitch here with this yarn over, but I didn't want to increase my stitch count. So because I've made a stitch with my yarn over, the next 2 stitches are being knitted together, so that keeps the stitch count the same. So knit 2, yarn over, which is increasing a stitch to make that hole in a minute, which you'll see. And because I don't want to increase the stitch count, I'm going to knit the next 2 together. And then let's just knit off those last ones there. We're on our wrong side row now, so I'm going to purl this row, and then you'll see in a minute when I get to my stitch that was a yarn over, it's not doing anything, it's just a looped wrapped piece of yarn around my needle. That was the yarn over stitch. So I will knit into there, knit into the next stitch, there's another one of those yarn overs there. It's just wrapped loosely around over the top of the needle. I shall knit into that. And there's the last one there, that loose wrapping of the yarn over just there. So we'll knit into that one. No, we're not, we're purling, aren't we? Purl into that one. Okay. So we can see now that we've got holes appeared in our work. Those holes are there because instead of knitting a stitch, we wrapped the yarn around the needle and it created a hole, and that is how you create a buttonhole. It's also how you would create some eyelets. So I'm just going to do a knit row and a purl row, and then I'll show you what they look like as eyelets. Now you'll find the eyelets on my knitted jumper pattern, and they're put all the way around just below the arms, sort of just above her waistline on the jumper, and that's where you can thread some ribbon or a piece of plaited yarn through. Oh, I keep doing this today, don't I? To make like a tie, to pull it in like a tie. It's really difficult trying to knit with your arms way out in front of you so that I can get it in camera view. That's why it keeps slipping off. But hey, we're getting there. Okay, so I'm going back on this wrong side row with my purl stitches. And then you'll be able to see clearer now those eyelets that I made, or buttonholes. Okay, so you can make a series of these in your work, and then they will create holes that you could run a ribbon through, or you could run a, you could have a little cord tie made out of your yarn, run that through, or for buttonholes. So that is how you make a dropped, slipped buttonhole stitch. Okay, so I've just done another couple of rows, and then finally for this little piece of example knitting, I'm going to show you how to cast off your work. So ideally I like to cast off on a purl row, so a wrong side row facing. So I'm just going to knit this row, so this is a knit row. I'm going to cast off on my wrong side row. So now I've got my wrong side facing, which is basically a purl row. So wrong side facing, and this is how I'm going to cast off. But even though it's a purl row, purl side facing, I'm going to cast off knitwise. Okay, so to cast off, slip the first stitch, knit the next stitch. So you've now got 2 stitches on your needle, and you're going to take that first stitch and you're going to take it over the second stitch. So with your left needle you just hook that on and you pull it over and drop it off. Then we're going to knit the next one, 2 stitches on my needle. I'm going to take my left hand needle, hook that first stitch over the second stitch and drop it off. Knit again, there's the 2 stitches, grab hold of that and drop it off. Now if you keep your tension nice and tight as you're doing this, it will give you a nice firm, tight looking cast off edge. If you're too loose here, it might make it a bit baggy, so bear this in mind when you're casting off the top of that Polly's cardigan, because there's quite a lot of stitches still there at the top, and you need to make sure that you really pull on that tension with each stitch. Otherwise it'll make it really, really baggy, that neck edge. So pull that, and I'm still pulling on that tension as I'm pulling it over. So all the time I'm decreasing, casting off, I really am pulling down on my needle here to make sure that I'm keeping it nice and tight. So tight, tight. And here we are coming to the end. And then finally the last stitch. It's pulled over, and then when you've got that last remaining stitch there, you can take your scissors, cut your tail end and just pull it through. And then what you need to do is obviously you need to use a darning needle just to secure that bit in. Sometimes that last stitch there is a bit loose, so when I'm darning it in, I tend to wrap it around and pull that over a little bit and sew it into there, because that does go a little bit loose, that last stitch there. So there is your cast off edge. Now because I've cast off from the wrong side, you can see the stitches are laying in this line like that. Can you see them all laying in a little row, all those stitches there? But when you turn over to the right side, you've only got a smaller version of that. You've got more like little tiny bobbles, and that's how I like it. If I'd have cast it off right side facing, I would have had that look, that row of stitches look on the right side, but I prefer to have that look, little tiny bobbles, rather than the stitches laying sort of like flat in a line. So that's why I tend to cast off on the purl side. So yeah, so that was a little exercise in casting on, knitting to make your garter stitch, and then doing your stocking stitch, which was knit one row, purl one row, followed by we did some make ones to increase some stitches along here, and then we did some decreases here with our slip slip knit and our knit twos together. Then we did some eyelets for our eyelet design or our buttonholes, and then we did a cast off. Do stay tuned, because I'm going to continue this video with some show and tell of the iCord, which runs up and down the side of Polly's cardigan, which I know some of you are having a bit of a nightmare on. So I'm going to show you how to do that in a quick and easy method for learning how to do it. And I'm also going to show you how to block your cardigan and the difference between blocking and unblocking. Okay, I'll see you back here in 2 minutes. Okay, so now on to the next part of the demo. I'm going to show you how to add the sleeve into the body section of the classic cardigan. So for demo purposes, I've just knitted together a very short sleeve. Obviously your sleeve will be that length when you knit it properly, but just for demo purposes I've just knitted up a few rows of the sleeve. Once you've knitted each sleeve in the correct length, you then need to transfer it to a spare needle. Now that needle can either be the same size as the one that you're using or a smaller size needle. So here I've got a 12. I haven't got a clue what that is. This is one of my Auntie Lena's old knitting needles. This is probably about 60 years old, this knitting needle. Anyway, it needs to be a smaller needle, and you transfer your sleeve onto that smaller needle. And the way you transfer is basically, it's a bit like a purl, because you're going in from the front. All you do is you just hook each stitch as it comes, and you just hook it onto the spare needle. So just hook off all the way along. But remember to do it in this sort of like going in through the front of the loop, because then it's going to be laying in the correct position for you to add it in to the body, or to the, to the body of the cardigan. So we'll just whip off these few final stitches. Okay, so now your tail end is up this end, and you can see that some of those stitches do get a bit loose and baggy. That's absolutely fine, just pull them through and they'll re-tighten. Okay, so your two sleeves are now on this spare needle waiting to be inserted into your body of your cardigan. So again, I've just knitted up just a rough piece of knitting to show what it would look like when you are going to include the sleeve into the body. Now obviously the body is going to be this long. I've just knitted up this little short piece here just to show you how to add it in. So the first thing we're going to do, you'll notice in your pattern it will say knit so many, and then it will say cast off, I think it's cast off 6 stitches. So in the middle of the work you're going to cast off 6 stitches. So your first cast off is you knit 2, and then you cast off that 1. So you've now basically got a gap in your work where you have casted off those 6 stitches, and then the pattern will say continue to knit however many it is, can't remember, and you include that stitch on your needle as number 1. So I'm just going to knit a few, not going to go right the way along. Okay, so you can see that you're going to have 2 holes within your work, 2 gaps within your work, which is where your sleeves are going to be positioned. Okay, so I've come back on my wrong side purl. I've not gone right the way along the whole row, I've just done a turn there and come back. And then when you get to the gap that you made with those cast off stitches, this is where we're adding the sleeve in here. So you get to the gap, so don't forget this is purl stitches we're doing here because this is a wrong side row. So you've now got to that gap, and this is where it can be a bit tricky. So you've got to the gap, push those remaining stitches as far down on the needle as on the left hand needle as you can, and then take your spare needle where your sleeve is, and you'll see that it's now wrong side facing. So that was the right side facing. Turning it over because we're going to work from the needle, and it's now wrong side facing, which matches where you are on your body, wrong side facing. So all you're going to basically do is you're going to purl off, you're going to forget about that needle. Okay, you can push your stitches right down to the bottom, so forget about that needle. You're just working with your right hand needle and your spare needle, and then you're going to purl off all those stitches that are on your spare needle. Now make sure that that first stitch that you do, you pull it as tight as you can get it. Really get that pulled in tight there, because if you don't, you'll be left with a bit of baggy yarn in the middle. So really pull a good 4 or 5 stitches as you're working in, really get that pulled in. Okay, so we're just coming to the end now of adding in the sleeve. When you get to the end, your stitches might have gone a bit loose, that's fine. You can just tighten them by pulling hold of the yarn tail, which is at the end of that sleeve, and locking that back into becoming more tighter. Okay, so now what we've done is we've added a sleeve onto the body. Now that would be the first hole that we came to, the first cast off hole. So now we need to reattach back to the body. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that your sleeve is tucked towards the back of the work. So push your sleeve behind. So your sleeve is now laying at the back of the work. There's your gap there with your cast off stitches. We're now going to push the body back up to the very tip of the needle. And we're going to continue to purl back into the body. Now make sure that you pull up that yarn really tight. And then the first stitch that you do back into the body, make that stitch really tight as well. So pull hard at least 3 or 4 stitches. Then you are continuing to work on to that next hole that you've made for your second sleeve, and you'll repeat by adding in that second sleeve. Okay, so now we're coming back on our right side row, and as we approach the area where we've inserted our sleeve, so you can see that that is the body of the knitting. Here is the inserted sleeve facing the right way now, because we did push it to the back of our work, and then here's the continuation of the body, and underneath the sleeve you can see those cast off stitches that we did. That's creating the armhole. So as we approach the sleeve that we've just knitted in, purled in, you'll notice that the remaining stitches of the body you can see are there, and the first stitch of the sleeve is there. Okay, so you need to look for that first stitch of the sleeve and the last stitch of the body. Now when you get to the last stitch of the body, so I'll just knit that one more. So what I've got here is I've got my last stitch of the body, and then I've got the starting of my sleeve. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take that last stitch of the body and the first stitch of the sleeve together, so you put your needle in through both of them. So you're taking both of those 2 stitches and you are transferring them to the right needle. So that's 2 knit stitches slipped. Then you're going to knit the next stitch, and then you are going to slip those 2 knit stitches that you slipped over the top of the stitch that you've just knitted. Bit hard, you need to be firm. So I've got those 2 slip stitches on my left hand needle now, and I'm just going to slide them over, hook them over that knitted stitch, and then you continue. So you continue up to, this time you would continue up to the end of the sleeve. So let's just work through the sleeve section. And here we are coming to the end of knitting the sleeve section, and I can see by just prising it apart I've got 3 stitches left of my sleeve, and that's the first stitch there starting back into the body. So I'm going to knit 2, which is just going to leave me with the 1 stitch left on the sleeve, followed by the first stitch of the body. And I'm going to repeat exactly the same again. I'm going to slip 2 knit stitches together, so taking those 2 together, slipping them onto my right hand needle, knitting the next stitch tightly, and then slipping those 2 stitches back over that knitted stitch, and then continue to knit, making sure that that next stitch I do I pull really tight, because we don't want that to be baggy. So now I'm continuing working through the body section until I reach the next sleeve, and I repeat exactly the same. So what I've got here is I've got my body of my knitting, I've got my sleeve which is now firmly attached to the work, and I'm working through the back piece of the body, then I'll come to another hole, no, I'll come to the other sleeve, and a repeat. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work some rows, and then I'm going to show you how that you can recognise your raglan shaping without having to put markers in. So yeah, so I'll just do some rows and I'll be back. Okay, so I've continued to work another 4 rows, and as you can see, the raglan shaping is starting to take place. So there's my raglan shaping, which is clearly defined by this sort of protruding slanted stitch. There's my sleeve, and as we get to the other end of the sleeve, you can see the raglan shaping there. So if I just show you on these, you can see that's the raglan shaping that's being produced, which is decreasing by 4 stitches on every right side row that you do. So yeah, there's the raglan stitching. Now I just want to show you the easiest way to do it, rather than actually putting in a stitch marker to prompt you when to do that slip, slip, knit, pass slip stitch over. Rather than putting in a stitch marker, it's just so much easier if you can learn to recognise when to do that slip, slip, knit, pass slip stitch over. Okay? Makes life much easier rather than having to put in a stitch marker. So I'm just working my iCord. So that's a knit, slip on purlways. Then I'm going to knit up to 2 stitches. This is always on a right side row, so I'm going to knit up to 2 stitches prior to that raglan shaping, or 2 stitches prior to that protruding V stitch. Okay, so I know it's coming because I can feel that the sleeve's there. So you get to recognise your work, you get to know, you get the feel of it. You think, oh yeah, I've got sleeve coming along here. So I'm nearly there. So I can see my protruding V stitch, and I can see the stitch that it's attached to, that one there. So I want to knit to the one before it. So I know that I've got another 2 stitches to knit. So I'm going to knit those 2. And now I'm at the point where I'm going to do that slip, slip, knit, pass slip stitch over, because there's my protruding V stitch. There it is on the needle, and there's one before. You always have one before the V. So I'm going to take those 2 together, slip those 2 together, so it's the V stitch and the one before, slip those 2 together onto my right needle. I'm going to knit the next one tightly, and then I'm going to pass those 2 stitches over that knitted stitch, and that's creating the next V. And then I know that I can now just continue to work till I get to the next protruding V stitch, slanted V stitch we'll call it. So this prevents you from having to put in stitch markers or anything like that. You just get to recognise when that stitch is coming. Much easier than putting in a stitch marker. Okay, so I know it's coming. I have a quick check to see how many I need to knit. And there we are, we're up at it now. So there is the little protruding slanted V stitch and my 1 stitch before. So as before, I'm going to slip those 2 together, I'm going to knit 1, and then I'm going to pass those 2 slip stitches over and then knit on. And that is all there is to it to create the raglan sleeve shaping. So yeah, have a practice on a bit of scrap yarn. You know, put on a series of, I don't know, say 20 stitches, and just have a go at creating that protruding slanted V stitch, and then you'll get to know how to recognise it when it's coming up and when you need to do that knit 2 slip stitches and pass slip stitch over. So yeah, there you can see it clearly. There is my little raglan shaping. being produced quite nicely, and I always know that my stitch before is the one that I grab with that stitch and do as a pass slip stitch over. Okay, hope that little hack helps. Okay, so on to creating this little iCord that is part of the Polly classic cardigan pattern, which I know some of you do struggle with, but I've got a little hack to show you on what you can do to remember how to do this iCord at the sides. So here it is, you can see it here on this cardigan, waiting to be blocked. So you can see that it's iCord down there, iCord down the front. You've got a garter stitch, selvage, garter stitch, hem at the bottom. So I've replicated that in this incy wincy teeny weeny little piece of sample knitting here. So we have our garter stitch, selvage, our iCord, our body, our garter stitch, selvage, and our iCord. So I'm going to just show you how to do it, just using this small little sample piece. Okay, so the hack that I've created, not rocket science, I've just written out basically what you need to do with the last stitches to create the iCord. Now if you write something like this out or print it out, put it by your side where you're knitting, then when you get to the end and the beginning of each row, you can have a quick look at this and think, oh, that's what I've got to do on the right side row, and that's what I've got to do on the wrong side row. Okay, so make it easy for you to follow along. Sorry, it's a bit out of focus there, but the camera is focused for my hand. Okay, so this is the right side row. So I look at my form, and at the beginning of my right side row, I need to do a knit and a purl stitch. So I start with my knit, and then for my purl stitch, I'm not actually going to stitch it, I'm not going to knit the purl stitch, I'm just going to slip it off. So I'm going to take my yarn to the front of the work, and I'm going to slip that stitch as if I was going to purl it. So I'm slipping it as if I was going to purl it. My yarn is forward, so that is as if I was going to purl it. Slip it off onto the needle. Take my yarn back to the back of the work as if I'm going to do a knit, and then the next stitch is a knit. So those are 3 stitches there for the iCord. So knit, slip 1 purlways, knit. Now I'm into the 5 knit stitches of my selvage. I've also got 5 stitches here which are constituting the body of my work for my sample, and then I'm back in to the final 8 stitches here, 5 of which are the selvage, 3 are the iCord. So I knit the 5 for the selvage, then my final 3 stitches are my iCord. So I look at my form, and my last 2 stitches are purl and knit. So I know I can knit 1 more, and my last 2 stitches are purl and knit. So I bring my yarn forward as if I'm going to purl. I'm not going to purl, I'm just going to slip it off as if I was going to purl it. So you slip off purlwise, yarn back to the back, and then my last stitch is knit. So that's all you do for a right side row. So it's basically knit, purl, knit all the way along, purl, knit. Well, you're not purling, you're actually slipping the purl. So it's knit, slip a purl, knit, slip a purl, knit for the right side row. And then for the wrong side row, we look at our form, and it says to begin with, for our 3 stitches, we've got a purl, knit, purl. It's not actually purling the stitch, it's slipping it purlwise. So I have my yarn positioned on top of my needle as if I'm going to purl. I'm not going to purl into the stitch, I'm just going to slip it off. So I've slipped that purlways. Then I bring my yarn to the back, and I'm going to knit the next stitch, and then the next stitch is another purl. So bring my yarn forward and slip that purl ways as if I was going to purl it, but I'm not. I've just slipped it off, back to knit. So those are my 3 stitches there for my iCord on the wrong side. I know that my next 5 stitches are my selvage. So that's those, so I've knitted those. The next 5 stitches are my body, so this is the stocking stitch, so these are purl stitches. So I will just purl 5 of those, and then I will be left with 8 stitches. So I've got 8 stitches left, which is my 5 stitches of my selvage plus my 3 stitches of my iCord. So I know I need to knit the selvage because it's a garter stitch, so I knit the 5 there. And then I'm left with my 3 stitches for my iCord. I look at my chart and it says purl, knit, purl. So I bring my yarn forward and I slip that as if I was going to purl it, but I'm not purling it, I'm just slipping it off. Put my yarn to the back, knit that one, and then my last stitch is a purl as well. So I bring my yarn forward and I slip that off as if it was a purl. And then you take that yarn and you wrap it around the front. That hooks that last stitch in. So that is basically all you do for the iCord. Now, you need to be careful because if you mess up and you get it wrong, it's going to produce a kink in your work. Also, if you have to unpick your work and you have to take out, say, 2 or 3 rows because you made a mistake somewhere, it's an absolute nightmare trying to get the stitches back on the needle because the stitches have to be laying in a certain way, and that slip purl that you do, if you put that on your needle the wrong way round, it's going to show as a kink. So you've got to really, really concentrate at the ends and at the beginning of every row so you get it right, because if you make one mistake it's going to show as a kink in the iCord. You've got to get it right. Believe me, I've done loads of cardigans where I've sewn up about another 8 rows and looked down and thought, oh no, I've got a kink. And then I've unpicked, say, 8 rows, and then I've tried to get the stitches back on the needle laying in the right position so that it's all going to lay flat and look good. And then in the end I end up unpicking the whole blooming thing, thinking, oh, do you know what, it's quick to start again, faffing around. Okay, so quickly, I'm going to show you quickly then, you know, how I would work it. So my first stitch is knit. You just got to be really careful that you hold onto that knitted stitch. Don't let that fall off, because if it falls off, you've got to know how to put it back on your needle in the right position. Then we're going to slip, and then these are all knitting. The right side is really easy because once you've done the iCord, you're going into the knit part of the selvage, then you're going into the knit part of the stocking stitch. So the right side row is really, really easy. You're just needing to concentrate on the first 2 stitches and the last 2 stitches. So it makes it quite easy peasy, that row. So here's my last 2 stitches, and I know that here I need to do a purl, slide off purl, and a knit. So that right side row is quite simple. Okay, so then the wrong side row is basically the 3 stitches either end are, you know, worked differently. So we're going to do purl, slip off purl, hold on to it, don't let it fall off your needle, don't want to lose it. Bring the yarn to the back, do a knit. Keep this tight. I think someone on the group said, why were they getting little holes? It's because you're not keeping this tight, especially when you do that purl there and you bring that yarn back over. Make sure that this next knit stitch that you do, you really pull on that yarn to get that tight, because you will end up with that tiny little hole there just there, which you don't want. So, you know, along that I-cord, get those stitches knitted as tight as possible to prevent any little tiny holes appearing. Okay, so we go along here to our stocking stitch, which is our purl, and then our last 8 stitches, so 5 are knit, and then the last 3 are purl, slip, knit, purl, slip, bring that yarn round to the front, ready for your next go. Okay, so that is how you do the I-cord for the edges of your cardigan. Okay, sorry, my computer just went off. My screen went blank. I'm just making sure I'm still recording. Yes, I am. Okay, I'm going to show you how to block this next, so you can see what it looks like before and after. Okay, now if you decided, oh, I don't want to do that I-cord, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to do the I-cord. You can just do a plain 5-stitch selvage and a garter stitch down there. Okay, so on your pattern, you just take off and knit 3 stitches either end of the pattern. And where it says the selvage is 8 stitches, your selvage will be 5 because you're just working these 5 garter stitches. And just a word to say as well, if you're doing just a garter stitch selvage like it is on my knitted jumper pattern, it's 5 stitches for the selvage, but the first stitch you always slip and then you knit 4. And then at the end of that row you are going to knit the 5, but when you come back to the other side you slip the first stitch and then you knit 4. Okay, so now on to showing you how to block these cardigans. So this is an unblocked cardigan, and as you can see it's a little bit out of shape, it's a little bit curly, especially on the arm seams, and there's a little bit wibbly wobbly down the front. By blocking you can actually ease out all of these discrepancies and make it look so much better. Now I do feel that if you block your items it just makes them 100% better. So this is an unblocked cardigan compared to a blocked cardigan. So as you can see it just lays a lot flatter. Also that's a little bit more sort of stiffer, whereas when you block it, especially the bamboo, it just produces this beautiful, soft, flowing, lovely fabric. So yeah, if you can block, I would strongly advise it. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to, I'm going to just lay down the towel because I'm going to bring my cardigan back in a minute after I've dunked it in the sink. And then we're going to use this piece of board. Now all this is, it's just a piece of foam board you can get from a stationer's shop. That's what I like to use. You can actually buy blocking boards specific for the purpose, but I find that these A4 foam boards work just as well. And then once they get really sort of stained with watermarks, you can chuck them away and buy another one, as they're really inexpensive. Okay, so I'm going to go and soak my cardigan. So here it is. I'm just going to put it in the sink bowl, give it a good old swill around, make sure it gets completely wet, and then I'll bring it back and I'll show you how I block it. Okay, so I've put the cardigan in the sink bowl and I've given it a good old dunk, made sure that it's completely soaked, and when I brought it out of the bowl I just folded it in half, one squeeze. I didn't rinse it, you know, squeeze it around like that or anything, just one squeeze, and then just squashed it inside a tea towel just to take some of the excess water off. Okay, so all you do for blocking is you lay it out on your board and you can really manipulate how you want it to look. So I do the back first, make sure the back's all nicely lined up, then I bring the front over, pull that iCord bit down flat, also tease it over, because however you're laying your cardigan, it will set and dry in that position. So take your time to just make sure that it's all positioned nicely. So again, I'm just going to give that a little stretch, pull that iCord over there, and then with the arms, because I want to take away that curl from the inner corner of the arm, inner edge of the arm, I'm just going to smooth that down flat. Same with this side. Make sure that's got a nice crease down the middle. And the same with this arm. So roll that over here. As you can see, I've still got all my ends on, my tails. Those will be sewn in once the blocking has been finished. So butt those up there together, make sure that they match nice. Yeah, and then when you're happy with it, make sure that everything's straight as it should be. You can then use your blocking pins. Now we sell these on the website. These are Knit Pro blocking pins. It's best to use proper blocking pins. If you were to use normal dressmaker pins, because it's going into damp fabric, they could rust, especially if you left it over a considerable amount of time before you actually took it off and you know, took it off the board. So yeah, blocking pins, they don't rust, so they're the perfect thing to use. So I just take my pins and I just stab it into the board in the positions that I want to keep flat. Then this just keeps it all nicely in place. It's not going to move anywhere, and it's going to stay where I put my pins. This is going straight through into the foam board. Okay, just tweak and pull, position where you want it to be. Because it's bamboo and it's a natural fibre, has a tendency to dry in whatever position you put it in. So yeah, so really sort of spend your time just making sure that everything is in the right position, because it's going to dry exactly as you position it. Okay, so that is now ready to dry. If it was the summer, I would just put it out in the back garden. I'd put it on the table and leave it there for a day or so to dry. But as we're winter, we're just coming into spring. It's too cold to leave it outside, so what I do is I just pop this on the radiator. So I just hold it upright like that, and I just balance that on top of the radiator, and that will dry nicely overnight. So I will come back in the morning and show you what it's like. Okay, so here it is. It's all nicely dried. It's been drying on the radiator overnight. So yeah, it's all ready to show you what it looks like after it's been blocked. So we'll just remove the T-pins. And as you can see, it's keeping into the shape that I manipulated it to. Let's get rid of that from the board. So now you can see It's just nice and light, and everything is staying in the position that I laid it out on my board. It just takes on a completely different appearance once it's blocked. So as you can see now that this line is nice and straight going down here, it's not kinking over. So yeah, so let me just show you an unblocked one. So here is an unblocked one, and as you can see it's a bit curly, a bit bent in on the selvage. It's kinking up a little bit here, and you also get a bit of a curl as well if you don't block. So yeah, so there's the difference between the two. So you've got the unblocked and the blocked, and I think the blocked just looks so much more professional as a finished item. So with your classic cardigan pattern for Polly, as you can see, this is just the plain version that will come with the pattern. You can also do some different things. On this one, I've just simply added a collar to the top, so this is great for Ollie. I think it's about row 58 or 59. I just cast off 4 stitches along that selvage, and then I just did garter stitch. I think it's about another 12 rows of garter stitch, just completely straight up, and then that will produce that lovely little collar. Now this yarn, this is King Cole Cherish, and it's a self-patterning yarn. Absolutely beautiful. I think there's about 12 or so different colours of it, and I really love working with this because it just produces this wonderful Fair Isle effect. So you haven't got to do any work, because the yarn is going to completely self-pattern for you as you're working along, and it's great for Polly cardigans, Ollie cardigans. So yeah, a great self-patterning yarn there. This is just to show you what you can do with this classic cardigan. You can produce your own patterns within the bodywork of the design. So this one, I've just done some of the eyelet holes. Again, I showed you the eyelet holes earlier. Buttonhole holes, eyelet holes. So yeah, I've just produced some eyelet designs going all the way up through the body there, and obviously up the back as well. So yeah, so once you've got your classic cardigan for Polly, which is available on the website, sky's the limit really with how you want to sort of, you know, decorate the body, the sleeves, anything like that, add the collar. Yeah, lots of different things that you can do. So my lovelies, I hope you enjoyed this knitting video. I think I've tried to cover as many aspects as I possibly could. If you get any questions, obviously please do contact me, and I can help you out. But if you've never knitted before, give it a go, because it's really therapeutic. It's a lovely thing to do while you're sat there watching telly at night. I know I thoroughly enjoy to relax and unwind with a bit of knitting. So have a go, grab yourself a pattern, get yourself some needles and knit away. Okay, until next time, see you soon, bye.